Welcome to What's Your Take? Brooke, the other day you were telling me that you read something really interesting about giving feedback.
The main idea is that when you're giving someone feedback, you want to focus the feedback on an isolated example and not on the person's character or their motives.
On the receiving end of feedback, I'm realizing I'm a pretty sensitive person, and it can quickly escalate what should have just been like a very benign conversation into an argument. And so I think it's something that I really need to work on, is receiving it and understanding the motivation behind it isn't meant to be personal, especially when it's just like this very concrete thing that's meant to just be helpful.
I think with feedback especially, it's so important to be thoughtful and delicate and to really kind of see the situation from the other person's point of view so that they don't feel like they're getting a character assault, but they feel like they're being handled delicately.
Yeah.
And my husband's really good at that. He's actually the one who's kind of helped me notice how nice that is, because when he gives feedback, it ends up being a really good experience. He'll kind of describe what I'm trying to do, like he'll describe my good motives, but how maybe part of that isn't working out the way that I am wishing that it would. That can be really helpful in giving feedback if you kind of describe it from that person's point of view and how they're trying to do the right thing, and one tweak could make it better.
I think that skill too of looking at the whole picture is so valuable. We often make judgments on looking at a very singular part of a person or an action, but when you have the context to it, those judgments then often disappear. It's the same way with like bias or prejudice or criticism. Like if you can look at the whole story, it just allows you to have a softer and more tolerant and more accepting perspective towards other people. And I think that can only do good for the world and relationships.
There's a lot of focus when I was growing up about, academic study, and you had physical education. So you had gym at school, and then you were learning academically. And it wasn't until well into adulthood, really when I was in grad school, where I started learning about emotional intelligence. And then that was a whole new thing. It's a whole new skill set. And I'm really grateful that that's actually something that's, I think, being talked about and understood more widely, that there's a lot of literature and things out there that have been really helpful. And then also that it's something that's very teachable. Because I think for a long time I thought it was something like our temperaments are something we're born with. But it's actually something that can be developed and learned about and matured and grown, and I just think it's so fascinating.
It is, and important, because the benefits, like you were saying, are relationships.
Something that I found that my husband does that's really helpful too is if he has feedback, oftentimes he'll say, "And do you have anything for me?" And so I think that invites this give and take rather than one of us is sort of being assessed or judged or critiqued. It's more just a conversation of recognizing, oh, here's something that we should change, but obviously it'll work better if we're both willing to make some changes. I am very impulsive.
Me too.
I have a very full range of emotions that like to express themselves all the time. And so that's something I really do struggle with. Have you guys found anything that helps you sort of take a step back and stay level-headed, especially if something feels really urgent or is triggering kind of a strong emotional response?
Yeah, so I am very impulsive too.
Okay.
That's like the top thing on my self-improvement list, is to be less impulsive. So I'm always trying to kind of keep that down.
I always think of this antiquated saying, but just like bite your tongue. Because I feel like, especially when my emotions get high, it's just so easy to want to respond immediately. And I always want to do it verbally. Like I want to express how I'm feeling, which usually at that point is all just negative and judgment. And I haven't had allowed time for myself to see the whole situation and to think about how what I'm about to say will affect the other person. But if I can bite my tongue for a minute, and I just say that to myself, like a little mantra, just bite your tongue. And then it gives it a minute. And maybe it's not that I have all of this patience and self-control, but it's just that I have a boundary set and I can't walk past it until something outside of myself is allowing me to take time. And it's just that time. Like I feel like with so many of these like issues with our emotions and mastery over them, it's just giving yourself a little bit of time. And then that control and that thought and that intelligence, it all can be applied to the situation more easily.
Yes.
Okay.
So I think that often when we feel kind of the impulse to give feedback, it's really the more primitive side of ourself coming out. And if we give it time, then we can get in touch with the more rational side of ourself and give the feedback in a way that's more constructive and beneficial and supportive to the other person.
And really finding ways, like you were saying, to take time. I need that time to kind of collect my own thoughts and understand my own feelings before I dump that on someone else and then expect them to respond in a way that's more mature than I'm being, even, or more thoughtful and more reflective.
And I'm so grateful for the people in my life who are emotionally mature, who model for me what that looks like, so that I can learn from them and try to implement that. And so, I think it's something that's worth pursuing. It's worth actively and proactively pursuing, so that we can enjoy the benefits of being emotionally mature, and then also set that model in our workplaces and in marriage and with our children.
Another strategy that I found really helpful with giving and receiving feedback, and I learned this while I was teaching, is you often have to have conferences with students or parents. And so when you're giving feedback, we use something called the sandwich method. So you would sandwich your feedback in between two positive observations. So something good that they're doing, something to work on and improve, and then something good. So you would end on that conversation. And it was a really good tool, especially to frame those conversations, which can sometimes, like we've talked about, people feel very vulnerable. And again, looking at the whole picture. Here's a lot of things you're doing well. Here are some areas for improvement.
I like the way that you described that, because it sounds like something that would be nice to be on the receiving end of. Because I think anytime that we receive feedback, we are very exposed and very vulnerable. And so to kind of have that padded on either side sounds lovely. And I think emotional maturity, and specifically, giving feedback and receiving feedback in ways that are constructive and helpful, all of that kind of contributes to just a general harmony in relationships that I think isn't there if those skills aren't there.